Welcome to my messy studio, everyone. My name is Mark, and I'm an artist and a fountain pen addict. And in this video, we're going to be talking about these two pens, both made by Dian, the N11 and the A9. I'll give you an in-depth tour of these pens, take them through my patented series of tests, and then do a few quick drawings with them to determine whether, from an artist's perspective, they'll be a useful addition to your fountain pen arsenal. And as a bonus, I'm going to show you a perfect ink to pair with these pens. Let's get started. Dian has developed a reputation for itself lately with a number of hits, such as the wonderful Black Forest, a sturdy, well-designed all-metal pen that I have two of, and the M2, one of the best pocket pens on the market for any price. So, when these two pens appeared and received very positive reviews in the pen forums and from other YouTube pen reviewers, they immediately sparked my interest. The Black Forest and M2 are attractive pens, but these two are truly compelling designs with that difficult to achieve balance between originality and fanciness, without being gaudy or flashy. However, from what I could see, these pens had no other distinguishing features other than their unusual appearance, not in their performance of their nibs, not in their versatility, not in their filling systems. And since I'm a super practical person who never ever buys pens for their looks, I held off my purchase. Then I realized that I barely had any green pens in my collection, which felt downright criminal since green is my favorite color. So I went ahead and immediately bought them. I'm glad I did, because now that I have them, I can see that they have a number of practical qualities that justify the purchase. At least that's what I tell myself. In terms of length, this is a mid-sized pen, similar in dimension to the Lamy Safari. Capped, it's about 5.5 inches. Uncapped, about 4.75 inches. And then when posted, it extends to about 6.5 inches. Uncapped, the length is very comfortable, with the balance being gently front-loaded, but capped it becomes a touch too long, particularly since the cap is very heavy, throwing the balance to the back. Furthermore, though there's plastic liner inside the cap which keeps the pen from scratching, the faceted design keeps the pen from posting super securely. This isn't a big deal since the pen is perfectly comfortable to use unposted. I should also note that the cap unscrews with just a little bit over half a turn, something that's unusual and actually quite welcome. That makes this a great note-taking pen for those who need to cap and uncap the pen quickly. In terms of weight, the pen is substantial without feeling heavy, capped weighing in at 34 grams and uncapped weighing in at 21.5 grams. I like pens that are on the heavy side, and I think this fits the bill perfectly, again feeling substantial without being cumbersome or tiring to hold. Metal grip sections are often slippery and hard to hold, but this one for some reason, despite being highly polished, has a pleasant tackiness to it. Furthermore, the traditional tapered hourglass shape, combined with the fact that the cap threads are smooth and low profile, makes this pen very comfortable to hold. One drawback, however, is that holding the pen all the way back on the barrel, which is necessary for some drawing purposes, is not so comfortable because of the faceted texture. Whether this is true for all of the barrel patterns, I don't know. This is a cartridge converter pen using the 3.4mm bore diameter cartridge common to many Chinese pens. The larger cartridge size somewhat limits your ink choices to Chinese-made inks, but this isn't a problem for me since I prefer to use bottle inks, and the converter here is well built and has decent ink capacity, and also fits snugly into the pen. The housing in this pen is proprietary, and the nib looks to be a number 6. I say looks because I could not pull it out to confirm. My experience with Dian is that their nibs are usually pretty tightly fitted, requiring a rubber grip or even pliers to pull out. In this case, the rubber grip did not work, and I didn't want to try using pliers since the feed here has delicate fins which could be damaged in the process. Perhaps others have had an easier time, but to me, nibs that cannot be removed using a rubber grip is a major minus, preventing the pen from being cleaned easily. This means I would avoid using it with inks that are waterproof and being careful not to let inks sit in the pen for too long. Okay, let's take this pen for a spin using my 4 patented and proprietary tests. As always, for the sake of consistency, I'm working on Strathmore Bristol paper, which is a smooth, pure white, relatively non-absorbent surface, and using Lexington Gray ink, whose transparency helps us see how well the ink flows in the pen. Here we go. In the consistency test, this pen performed perfectly, putting down extra fine lines at every speed and in every direction. We artists require more from our pens than writers, since the variety of strokes and the speed at which they're delivered is much greater. Therefore, for you writers out there, a pen that draws well is guaranteed to write well, but the same guarantee cannot be made the other way around. In the line variation test, this pen performed about the same as many other non-flex steel nibs, providing a touch of variation, going from an extra fine line to about a medium. This is actually quite comparable to the nibs made by Jowo or Bock, and on my 1 through 10 flex scale rates at about a 2.5. Not quite a soft nib like the Pilot Falcon or the Pilot Custom 74 Soft Fine, but close. In the feedback test, this pen has a pleasant feedback to it, making you feel the stroke without being scratchy. This is very close to a Jowo or Bock nib experience, and is about the amount I enjoy in a pen. Anything smoother and I can't feel the paper, anything greater has too much drag for me and keeps me from whipping the pen around. And in the flow test, this pen is on the dry side. On my scale, which runs from very dry to dry, medium, medium wet, wet, and ends at very wet, this one ranks at about a medium dry. Good for fine drawing, where a lot of layering is required. Okay, now let's do a drawing with this pen, and as I draw, I'll share my thoughts. In this technique, I'm working in my Talon's Art Creation sketchbook, filled with multimedia paper, which is great for all kinds of wet media. To keep things interesting, I'm going to use a technique that I demonstrated in a previous video, by doing a drawing in graphite and then adding some highlights with wax-based white color pencil. Then I give the paper a light wash of ink before doing my actual drawing. The wash covers up the white marks, but since the pencil is wax-based, it acts like a resist, preventing the ink from penetrating in those areas. At the end of the drawing, I'm going to use an eraser to go over the washes, and you'll see the white areas revealed again. As for the promised ink pairing, here it is. This ink is made by J. Urban and is called Vert Empire. It's a perfect match for this pen, being a dark, muted green with some soft gray undertones. For those of you who like to match their ink with the color of the pen, this is a wonderfully complex, well-performing ink that I highly recommend. But what do I think of this pen? Well, Dian did it again. This is an absolutely exceptional pen at a stunning $20 price range. Unlike many pens in this budget category, there are no jiggling parts and rough unfinished corners. And the design is just marvelously original, striking without being flashy. This for me is about as much fanciness as I want in a pen. And the size, weight, and ergonomics are exceptional. This is a pen that takes no adjustment period, no time to get used to, and from the moment I picked it up and started drawing with it, it felt perfectly at home in my hand. And most importantly, the in-house nib performs perfectly. Really as good as any Jowo or Bock nib I've used. I've reviewed quite a few inexpensive pens from China over the years, and while the pen bodies themselves are often quite good, for some reason the quality control of the nibs has been wanting, with a number of head-scratchingly simple faults, tines that are irreparably scratchy, and feeds that don't provide enough flow to the pen. It seems like with the nibs and feeds made by Dian, the problem has been corrected entirely. This is a wonderful development. The pen comes with two drawbacks, one a matter of personal opinion, and one not. First, it's a cartridge converter. Yes, this filling system is probably the most practical and is liked by many, so feel free to disagree, but as an artist I like built-in filling systems since they give me extra ink capacity. The second is more important and less subjective. The nib and feed do not pull out, at least not without pliers, which can damage the pen. I know I'm going to get a lot of comments saying they managed to do it, and with ease, but I think I have pretty decent grip strength and it wouldn't budge. Yes, I suppose I could pull it out with pliers once and then sand down the nib to make it easier to remove next time. But such operations involve risking damage to the pen and are not for everyone. As it stands, The fact that the nib and feed are not removable makes the pen much more difficult to fully clean, making switching inks more time-consuming and making the pen ineligible for waterproof inks I often use. Here is the final drawing with this pen. The drawing itself is a little less successful, and I should have been a bit heavier with the white, but as a proof of the technique and a proof of this pen's perfect performance, I think it works quite well. Now let's talk about the Dian A9. This is also a very attractive pen that comes in a variety of colors and finishes. Unlike the faceted barrels of the N11, this has a finish that is described as moiré, perhaps incorrectly. At any rate, the pen has a mesmerizing spiral pattern that moves when you rotate it. At first it felt a little bit distracting, but I quickly got used to it. In terms of design, this pen does feel a little bit less premium, though it features a decorative finial and a sturdy arrow-shaped clip. When capped, the pen is a little shorter than the N11, being just under 5.5 inches. However, uncapped, it's actually longer by 1/4 of an inch, being just under 5 inches. And posted, it becomes 6 3/4 inches. And though it posts more securely than the N11, the length makes it very back-heavy and awkward to use. This for me is okay, because it's perfectly comfortable being used unposted. The cap here also unscrews in a little bit over a single turn, making this pen, like the N11, perfect for note-taking or just those fidgety people that are always capping and uncapping their pens. In terms of weight, this pen is almost all aluminum with the exception of a plastic grip section, and yet it manages to be a little heavier than the N11 at 34.5 grams. And uncapped, it remains slightly heavier, being about 22 grams. I attribute the extra weight to this pen's more girthy profile, but really the difference is very slight between the two. The long tapered grip section is very comfortable to hold, and the threads are smooth and low profile and don't catch against the fingers. Similar to the N11, holding the pen on the barrel is uncomfortable, this time because of the slickness rather than the texture. However, the grip section is long enough to allow a little bit of play on where the pen is held, so for me that's not a deal breaker. This again is a cartridge converter pen that takes the large bore 3.6mm cartridges, again, which limits your ink choices. But again, since I use bottled inks and the converter is well built, that's not an issue for me. The main difference between this pen and the N11 is the nib, which is a larger number 8 size. This nib size used to be very unusual, but is now featured on a number of inexpensive pens such as the Jinhao X159 and the Jinhao 9019. We'll talk about nib performance when we get to the tests, but the most significant difference between the N11 and the A9 is that the nib and feed here actually pull out, and do so quite easily, making this pen much easier to clean. This makes it possible to switch inks quickly, and should the pen get clogged, to pull everything apart and give it a good scrub down. Okay, let's take this pen for a spin and see how it performs. Again, I'm working on Strathmore Bristol paper here and using Noodler's Lexington Gray ink. In the consistency test, this pen performed almost perfectly with a few places where there was skipping. This could be due to my hand lifting off the paper slightly, but I should note that when I pulled out the nib and feed, the nib became slightly misaligned and I had to realign it. While it was my fault for mishandling the nib, it's also possible that these larger nibs are more susceptible to being damaged due to their longer tines. At any rate, the performance was perfectly acceptable, though not perfect like the N11. In the line variation test, there was a pleasant surprise. This nib went from an extra fine line to broad. Though some pressure was required, the line variation was very clear. This is one advantage of larger nibs. The longer tines increase their flexibility so that even a steel, non-flex nib will allow for considerable line variation. On my flex scale, I put this one in the 3.5 range, deep into semi-flex nib territory. In the feedback test, I found this pen to be a touch scratchier than the N11, but still within my comfort zone. This could be because I didn't realign the nib perfectly, but I didn't notice it being scratchy in a single direction, so that's unlikely. Though I like it as it is, I'll probably give this pen a slight polishing on the micromesh right after this test. In the flow test, this pen was slightly wetter than the N11, which is why it produced darker lines with a Lexington gray ink. One thing I previously failed to mention is that unlike the plastic feed on the N11, the feed here is made of ebonite, which is a hard rubber often used to make feeds in vintage pens. Ebonite feeds tend to have more generous ink flow, and it really shows here. Let's draw with this pen to really see how it performs, and as I draw, I'll give you my conclusions. In this technique, I'm starting in a more traditional way with a pencil underdrawing and a few washes before going in with a pen for hatching and detail. This dark green ink, though an unusual color for a portrait, works perfectly for this purpose, drying very evenly with just a touch of color variation. Like the N11, the A9 is an absolute pleasure to work with, perfect in terms of balance, weight, and comfort. One of those pens that takes no adjustment period, instantly becoming an extension of the hand. The real standout here, and what makes this pen better for drawing than the N11, is that large number 8 nib. Generally speaking, nib size makes no difference in the performance of a pen, and the reality is that manufacturers make the nibs larger for no other reason than to make a pen look more premium. However, in this case, the nib is quite exceptional, and the size of it is what actually makes it so nice. The substantial weight of the pen, combined with the flexibility of the nib, makes drawing with it feel like driving an old luxury car, like a 1980s Cadillac, with buttery soft suspension. This is not to say that this is a giant, heavy, lumbering pen, but rather that this is a very comfortable, bouncy ride that somehow feels luxurious. Of the two pens, this one is clearly better, though I find the faceted design of the N11 to be the nicer looking pen. Despite the slightly cheaper feel of the A8, the larger nib has better flow and better line variation. But most importantly, this is a pen that is much easier to clean, something that for artists is incredibly important. So, to conclude my review, both pens are an excellent deal, being well designed, sturdy, and well functioning. With the N11, unless you're bowled over by its unusual appearance and don't have enough green pens, I don't think it constitutes an essential purchase. Still, for under $20, it'll make for a very nice, affordable gift for someone who you wish to infect with a serious case of fountain pen addiction. The A8, on the other hand, with that bouncy semi-flex nib and generous ebonite feed, makes it an exceptionally good choice for drawing, and it is the pen I recommend you get. And it happens to also be very cool looking, so you won't have to make any sacrifices in terms of appearance. Here is the finished drawing. A better effort than the previous one, simply because I'm more used to working this way rather than anything to do with the pen. I hope you found my review of these pens and the accompanying drawings useful. And if you did, please subscribe and stay tuned for more fountain pen and other art material reviews and drawing instruction. Thanks for watching, and see you back in my messy studio very soon. Bye bye.